IVT's Validation Week is going virtual for 2020 this October. Not to be confused with a single presentation webinar or Zoom training, Val Week 2020 brings a completely virtual 3-day conference experience. With nearly 30 expert speakers and a combination of live and on-demand sessions crafted with your time in mind, the caliber of training content is unrivaled. Hear from top pharma, biotech, and medical device subject matter experts, gain exclusive insights from FDA speakers, build up your team's validation toolkit with take-home checklists and materials, and leverage unlimited networking opportunities with colleagues and key decision makers. Plus, claim up to 15 credit hours toward GMP training requirements. You won't want to miss it. Visit www.informaconnect.com/validation week for all details on agenda and registration. Once again, that's www.informaconnect.com/validation-week for all event details.
This is the United Podcast Network.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation, brought to you by the IVT Network. Each week, we bring you timely interviews with life science experts and discussions focused on trending topics, frequently asked questions, and industry best practices. This week, I am happy to introduce you to Lori Richter and Nuala Calnan, who are actually helping us launch a brand new series around quality risk management. It's great to have you both with us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here again.
Thanks again. Yes, that's right. You're an old pro at this, Lori. But we're talking about quality risk management this time, and this one will sort of cover the basics and set us up for future episodes in this same series. And to kick us off, I'll start with all processes and products come with some level of inherent risk. In the life sciences, the goal is always to reduce this risk as much as possible and ensure patient safety, of course, to the maximum extent. This systematic process for assessment, controls, communication, and review of risks across the product lifecycle is the focus of this new series of podcasts that I'm happy to introduce our audience to today. As I mentioned, we are going to cover some basics of quality risk management in today's episode, and subsequently move on to deep dives focused on some more intricate and nuanced areas of risk management in future episodes. So I thank the two of you for heading this up and really bringing together some knowledgeable folks in this area. For our listeners, and because this is our first episode, I really wanted to start with the most basic, which is the guidances. Because much of what we do in life science can be dependent on regulatory guidelines, I'd like to briefly have you each cover the current guidances that govern risk-based models of doing business and the QRM systems being used in the industry. So, Lori, I'm going to toss the ball to you first to have you cover the FDA Q9 guidances, and then Nuala will move over to you for WHO and European Commission guidances. So, Lori, if you could help us out with that, that'd be great.
Sure. So the first thing about, ICH-Q9 that we should think about is it is very basic in terms of it covers the fundamentals of executing a risk assessment. And it also talks about where best to implement quality risk management in the quality system. It is very focused in terms of the product, all the way from development, sort of covering the ICH-Q10 model, all the way from development to discontinuation. So it does go through each step of a diagram, which comes from all the way from planning through risk assessment, which is actually using the tools that people are familiar with, scoring, all of those kind of components, to risk control, making decisions whether or not you're going to reduce that risk or accept that risk, through risk review and keeping it living, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. It does mention very briefly tools that are recommended to use. And then I mentioned it talks a little bit about communication, but it's also, again, very light. ICH-Q9 came out and was approved in 2005. It was very basic and almost revolutionary at that time in pharmaceuticals. We're still struggling, I think, in some cases to implement that, but we've matured as well. Sure. So one thing that Nuala and I wanted to make sure to mention to the viewers and the listeners is that ICH-Q9 is going to go through a revision. There's already a team that's starting to kind of get together and work and meet on making those revisions. And I have lots of thoughts, and I'm sure Nuala does too, about what we'd like to see that mature into. But its basic premise is to protect the product before it gets to that patient, to protect even the supply to that patient. And it always asks that you must use scientific knowledge, but you must always link it back to the safety of that patient to protect that patient ultimately at the end of the day, and that you must right size that approach. I think that second bullet is the one that most users miss, and they apply these most complex tools, most difficult, challenging tools to their risk assessment and forget that it actually allows that. It allows you to right size it, choose the right tool, but always use scientific knowledge and link it back to the protection of the patient.
Sure.
So that's kind of the high level.
No, and I really appreciate that. And I appreciate that the guidances really are, wanting us to prioritize some and really focus on use the best tool for the job. And it's doesn't always have to be the most expensive or the most comprehensive or or whatever. Nuala, can you give us an overview or an update on the WHO and European Commission guidances?
Yeah, and I think just following on from what Laurie is saying there, I mean, ICH-Q9 still forms a backbone of a lot of the guidance, but what we, here in the EU, we have a slightly different perspective to our GMPs where they do get updated. Now, with 27 member states involved in the EU Commission, it does take a long time to get consensus and get updates done. But nevertheless, I mean, we would see risk-based risk management and risk-based thinking embedded within the GMPs now here in Europe. Whether you take from, chapter 1 of the EU GMPs, which is around the pharmaceutical quality system, right throughout, it's woven throughout that whole risk-based thinking and risk management concepts. And as Laurie mentioned, those science and risk-based decision-making processes. Most recently within the EU, of course, we've seen the update to Annex 1, which is the sterile guide, and that has largely been brought about as a result of weaving in the whole risk-based concepts there and risk around aseptic manufacture and sterile manufacture. So we see that in other areas. We've seen updates to cross-contamination, handling of excipients. Even in Annex 16, where we've seen quite a recent update in the past number of years around what we have here in Europe, the QP, the qualified person, and the control of batch release. Again, that's a very much risk-based approach. And they've specifically called out things like documentation of your supplier supply chain, which is largely come about to mean supply chain mapping. And that has a risk-based approach in most organizations here in the EU as well. So as well as mapping the supply chain, it gives you an opportunity to denote where you may have single point failures or increased risk. So as I say, it's embedded within the EU GMPs, and we're scheduled for an update to Chapter 1 of the EU GMPs at the moment, and I expect we'll only see more of the effectiveness of your risk management in there. Within the WHO, we have a great guidance, and both Laurie and I were only saying that it's little used but very useful guidance on deviation management and quality risk management, deviation handling and quality risk management. It stems from 2013, but it's got lots of really useful examples in there. And of course, we have seen quite an uptick coming out of the PICS, which of course includes the US now as well. They have a QRM expert circle within the PICS regions, and they've been producing guidance not only on risk-based inspection planning, but also on a checklist of what effective risk management would look like. So lots of activity and lots to come. But we still, and I think where Laurie and I would like to cover in this series is really about advancing us beyond what necessarily might be the minimum requirements set down in guidance, and really embedding that within the daily workflow and within our organizations, and enhancing the ability to advance our maturity around our approach and our practices to risk management.
And I think that's a great goal to have for this series, because, you know, as an industry, we definitely have been moving more towards this risk-based approach in manufacturing and across all life sciences, really, but we're in varying stages of that depending on the company that you might be in. So I think really helping our listeners incorporate this into every task in every department is useful. And a lot of the case studies that we'll hear about in coming episodes, you know, will really offer some best practices in doing that. So thank you. But so it seems here in this topic of risk management, it seems that the first step in creating a process is to better understand where your risks are. And I think that most of our listeners probably understand that. But it's beyond just understanding where your risks are. It also, you know, means that you need to understand the level of importance to the process and the product that each of these risks plays. So this is often why people start out with a formal risk assessment. Laurie, in your opinion, is this the right place to start?
So first, I'll say that the last thing I do is go into a formal risk assessment. That's actually sort of, if I had a decision tree that I could show, it's sort of my last stop, right? The first thing I start out with is, but you're absolutely right, that is where everybody goes. In fact, everybody says, let's do an FMEA, right? Yeah. I need a risk assessment. Let's go to this tool. The first thing we really should start out is to understand, what are we trying to assess here? What's the problem statement? What's the scope of this? What's the objective? And when I say, what am I trying to get out of this risk assessment? I don't mean, am I trying to get out of doing something by doing the risk assessment, which is where some people go. What I mean is, what decisions am I trying to make out of this risk assessment? Because if I understand that, I can work backwards to figure out what's in scope of this, what's the real problem I'm assessing, and then what's the correct tool that I want to, you know, perform this assessment on. And I would say more often than not, my last stop is that formal assessment. So often, as we work backwards and start to really figure out what we want to get out of this, sometimes it's a very simple risk-based questionnaire, right? Mm-hmm. Or a risk-based decision tree. So I'm recommending that people really pause and spend a lot of time on that upfront work. And when I train people on risk management, I typically spend almost a whole day on pre-work and planning. And it's probably more than most people spend when they're trying to do the risk assessment at their company, right? Sure. Just on my training alone. So really, that's what I encourage, is people to pause, do that, sort of plan forward. And actually, if you do this right, the risk assessment ends up being the least of your work, right? Because you've actually established a really good tool. The team has a really good grounding on what they want to do, and they move forward. So I implore people to not walk into that conference room with that empty spreadsheet. And the FMEA that goes from, like, you know, Excel cell AA to like, or A to like, you know, ZZ, sure. Right? Is to really sit down and plan and think about what you want to do with that.
And Laurie, just for our listeners, if you can expand on that just a little bit and talk about, you know, a couple of things that might be involved in that pre-assessment work.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So first and foremost is, do we have the people on board that we need? Who are the correct subject matter experts? So one common phrase we have in risk assessments and in a lot of things is garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
If I don't have the right subject matter experts in that room, I'm not going to get a very thorough assessment out of it. The second piece I need to know is, who are the decision makers? Who's accountable for those decisions that are going to come out of this risk assessment? Now that I have the players and the people, and I have the person that probably has what I call the skin in the game, maybe they own the process,
Right.
or they own the operation or the piece of equipment that we're assessing, we're all going to get together now and start to develop that problem statement. And I really, really encourage you to do that as pre-work with just one or two folks offline as a facilitator, if you will, and then bringing that to the team and establishing that. I just did a risk assessment just last week where we spent 2 hours just clarifying the problem statement and scope. It's quite a large risk assessment, but I must say that I told the team at the end, now we know what we're trying to assess. We know what's in and out of scope. Now we can move forward with really understanding how to do this risk assessment. Those are huge steps, because if you don't do that, you'll spend the rest of the session going, wait, is that in scope or out of scope? Wait, are we asking the right questions? There's a lot of holdup and you can't move forward. And this is where people say risk assessments are so hard, right? Because we jumped into it and we didn't do that planning. The other thing I would suggest is understanding the data that you need up front. Do you have data even? Sometimes you don't, because you're designing something new, right? Do you have the data that you need? Do you have the scientific experts? One real issue I have is when we're doing design risk assessments for a facility and we don't have the microbiologist present. We have lots of engineers, which are fantastic, but that microbiologist knows how things need to flow and how there's ingress that could, sneak into the building. Those are the things you need to really establish up front.
Really great points, Lori. Thank you. I mean, this sounds like that is critical to the process, right? And so if you start there, then the risk assessment becomes a lot easier to get through as a group. What are the biggest challenges for companies in the application of quality risk management strategies across the life cycle? Nuala, I'm going to throw that one over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. This whole concept of life cycle management is very de rigueur at the moment with Q12 and other matters being discussed regularly. But life cycle management from the perspective of risk management or quality risk management is really where the integration of the synergies between the two twin enablers, as we call them, for the ICH Q10 process, the pharmaceutical quality system, that is QRM and KM knowledge management. So where those two processes and disciplines intersect, it will be the success or failure of your management across the life cycle. Now, what are the types of things that can really impact on QRM and KM synergizing to give you good life cycle management? And some of the things happen just because of disconnects in time and location, because you could have your process development group working in location A, they may even be in company A, and then you've got your tech transfer team working in location B, and then your receiving site may be in company C in location C. So you've got those disconnects in time and in geographic organizations. And they may be using different systems, and there may not be an effective knowledge transfer, knowledge flow across those silos. You can also get kind of locked-in syndrome, which is what I call, where you have these organizational silos. They're minding their own business, but they're not very good at ensuring that knowledge passes with the product. As the product transfers, and even the whole concept of technology transfer, there's a group of us in industry that would love to see that change to technology and knowledge transfer, because you can't pass the ball with the product without passing the critical knowledge that goes with that as well. So
and it's so important not only for the process and to make sure that everybody's on the same page, but you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, right? If you're passing on the knowledge.
It leads to unnecessary duplication of effort, but not only just if you're trying to do that risk assessment, and to Laurie's point earlier on, have you got the subject matter experts? Have you got the right data? There may well be data from the development or another transferring site in the life cycle that is, could be key to your ability to assess the risks now. And if it's lost or leaked, that knowledge leakage can happen between those stages. If it's lost or leaked, it's very difficult to build that kind of expertise in the new team, the receiving site team, or the commercialization the team. So specific issues then that can also affect that difficulties around the life cycle is that the different entities across the life cycle, even if they're within the same company, may not have a standard uniform scoring system. So one crew, in terms of their risk scoring, might be using a 1 to 5, another a 1 to 10. They may be using different risk grids. They may be using different risk criteria. They'll have established different risk thresholds. So when you pick up a risk assessment from a previous stage, sometimes it's difficult for people to actually identify with the information that's in that and make it meaningful. The other thing that can happen then on the flip side of that is that if you have a one-size-fits-all approach where you have these boilerplate tools, and both Laurie and I will come back to discuss this in one of the subsequent episodes. The key thing about part of this preparation that we talked about is that you tailor your criteria for the risk problem at which you're trying to address. So having a set of standard criteria that says frequently, probable, likely, is really meaningless unless you're able to bring it down to that's one failure per week on this product, or whatever that, or per month or per year, or whatever that might be, and to be specific about that. So they're just some of the problems that can occur really in that integration of risk management and knowledge management as we progress the product across its life cycle.
Yeah, thank you for that. So for quality risk management to be effective, then it needs to be incorporated into the daily workflow. And you've talked about, the need to obviously follow that through from department to department or stage to stage throughout the entire life cycle. Laurie, what are some of the strategies to ensure QRM is not a one and done, like I'm checking this off the list now and I never look back? What are there some strategies that our listeners can use to help them avoid that pitfall?
For sure. Unfortunately, the one and done happens more frequently than I would like it to. But yes, there are. First and foremost, and I don't want to spoil it, but is risk culture. Nuala and I will do that'll be part of the series. We'll talk about that in another episode. But just briefly to touch on that, do you have a culture at your company that is open to hearing about risk, that thinks about risk, that encourages talk about risk? Does leadership ask about risk when you present a project or move forward with milestones? I think that's the first and foremost thing, that you're transparent about that. The second piece is your quality policy mentioning within your quality management system that risk is important in some way, shape, or form in decision making? I think that's really important. I always, when I was a consultant, would always audit their quality manual or their quality policy, even if it's just one line that tells me that this company takes risk decision making very important. It makes it very important. The second piece is it built within your body of your quality management system. So Nuala touched on who in the deviation management one. That's just one SOP even usually, or one quality standard, or one document within that quality management system. Is it embedded within those decisions that you make that are most critical to protecting the product quality and the patient, right? So those, I think, are the key elements that when I think of that structure. The last piece is when leadership is making decisions, are they talking about the risk that they assess and the benefit that they assess? Are they asking for that in communication and when things are escalated up to those teams? If those things were embedded in your quality system and in your culture, you would for sure then ensure that these are kept up because you're asked for it. It's an expectation. It's part of the culture.
Sure. No, and that makes total sense. You have to put it there so everybody remembers to think about it, to do it, to live it, right?
Yep. And then lastly, I think just down to a tactical level, are people trained on how to keep their risk assessments updated? That's the very tactical piece. And truthfully, it's the one piece when I was a consultant that I was rarely asked to do. But when I did deliver that training, people were like, oh, this is how you keep a risk assessment living. It's not really intuitive how I'm supposed to do that, when I'm supposed to go back and open it, and what do I do once I open that risk assessment.
Right. Right. And training is often one of those things that's overlooked or delivered sort of last minute.
Not done well. Yeah.
Right. No,
Yeah.
100%. So we spoke about guidances at the onset of the episode, but what are regulators really looking for when they provide inspection? So, you've talked about a lot about developing this into your process, risk, the whole risk approach into your process. But when the inspectors come in or the regulators come in, what are they really looking for? And what are the biggest challenges for companies in the application? Across the life cycle. And I'm going to get both of your thoughts, Lori and Nuala, on this, because I know you've done a fair amount of dealing with regulators. So, help us understand what they're really looking for and what are some of the biggest challenges for companies when they do have these people on site.
Did you want me to start?
Lori, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, sure. I'll address the FDA side. I think, Nuala, you'll address the EMA or maybe some of the other sides as well. But first, I'll say that the FDA typically does not come in and ask to see your quality risk management program. They're typically coming in to see, are you making risk-based decisions? Do you understand the risk that you took when you made that decision? Did you document that risk? That's typically how they're looking at things. Mm-hmm. They love to see your risk management program, but it's not kind of the order of how things play out typically with these inspections. And so what we will do oftentimes to and reinforce that is we like to show the quality risk management program to the FDA. It typically makes the inspection go much better. They appreciate seeing it. They will then look for it. One of the things they'll typically ask for is if they see a decision that you made, they want to know, especially from a change control perspective, an investigation perspective, a complaint to the patient perspective. They want it from the patient. They want to know, did you assess that risk? How did you document it? What was your thought process going through it? And a lot of times their observation responses will be, we want to see a risk assessment. And that means various things to the FDA. It doesn't always mean an FMEA, which is what companies typically jump to. The FDA is simply saying, we do not believe you understood the risk. We don't think you assessed all the risk when you made this decision. And we're looking for you to document that in some way, right? Whether it's a formal tool or a technical assessment, if you will. Where companies struggle typically, what Nuala and I were talking about when we're in inspections is, there isn't a risk assessment sometimes, or the risk assessment was formulated in a way to, oftentimes the agency gets very, very irritated if you look like you did this risk assessment to stop doing something, or I want to reduce testing somehow. I wanted to get out of this requirement. One very, very clear thing I put in every procedure I've ever written for quality risk management is risk management does not obviate you from regulatory requirements. You must do these things, right? It's just that you need to understand risk sometimes around some of the decisions that you're making. So where we struggle is we won't have that to present, or sometimes we do present that and the documentation has not been kept living. One of the number one risk management observations the FDA will write you up for is outdated, because it's not the C, right, in CGMP.
Right.
If you have an outdated risk assessment, you didn't keep it living, they will look for that. When was the last time you updated it? Is it with the validated state? Those are the kinds of things that they'll definitely be very upset about when they see that.
Right. So this isn't a process where you develop the assessment and you put it up on the shelf, and then when the regulators come in, you dust it off.
There you go.
Right? Yeah, right. They're not looking for that.
No, but we do that sometimes. That's not okay.
The purpose of the documents is to be living documents, so that as you learn more about the product or the process, that you're keeping notes on that and really showing what you learned and what you've done in response to that.
Yeah, and the FDA very much appreciates that decision-making process.
Right.
They want to see this information. They just look at it a little differently than how I've seen EMA typically come in and look at risk management.
Yeah, and so perfect segue into Nuala. Can you give us some guidance here on what inspectors from EMA and other European regulatory agencies are looking for and some of the challenges for companies here?
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting here in Ireland on the wonders of this podcast, and we have a very strong agency here as well, the HPRA, and one of the leaders there is an international renowned expert in risk management. So you never front up for a risk or for an inspection when the HPRA are coming in without knowing exactly what Dr. Kevin O'Donnell's viewpoint is on risk management. So typically within the EU and the MHRA would have the same approach. They're much more interested in first and foremost, of course, all of those things that Laurie regarded around risk-based decision making. But they also want to see that you have a structured program, and that there's a hierarchy within your program, and that you have a formal that it's embedded within the pharmaceutical quality system. It's not just some kind of adjunct thing that you do, and that it actually does risk management, not just risk assessment, which is something we will talk about in other episodes. But it's a weakness of many systems that they have a policy that says they're doing QRM, quality risk management, but actually the only activities that are demonstrating that is a whole host of risk assessments that they've done, and mostly in an FMEA, as Laurie says. So a structured program and a clear indication that there's adequate competencies and training around that is important. I think one of the easiest things, and it doesn't matter what agency are coming in to review you, from an industry perspective, you're going to get nailed if you're not doing risk reviews. And again, we see it turning up. Lack of risk reviews where you have that one and done that we've talked about, that people aren't going back, whether it's in the light of their annual product reviews, whether it's in the light of maybe customer complaints or internal audit reviews, that they're not going back and looking at, well, now that we have this number of batches or this number of years working with this product, are there any new justifications or new risks that we need to introduce, and that we need to review the controls that we have in place. So the effectiveness of those controls don't get reviewed, and that's a really easy one for them to target for you.
And how often, Nuala, I'm going to stop you there for 1 second with a follow-up question. How often should people be doing these types of reviews, in your opinion?
Yeah, so it varies, but I would say, Laurie might want to jump in, but I would say as part of that annual product quality review, at a minimum, you should be taking your risk assessment for the product out and the process out, and saying, okay, in light of what we've learned this year, in light of the major deviations or any of the critical findings we've had in our audits, should we be looking at that? But then you may have episodic requirements to get in there. If you're changing a supplier or you're overhauling an element of the line, for instance, you're putting a new vision detection system in or something like that, it's an opportunity for you then to look at, well, are the rest of our existing controls adequate? And again, here's another area where the agencies can each pick up. Very often where we see a fall down in risk management is during a change management process. So, sure. Somebody's making a change that could be driven by a CAPA, a corrective action, or it could even be a process optimization that somebody's attempting to do. And they don't go back and review their original assumptions and their original risk controls adequately. And so we often find that post a change is when we discover a chink in the armor, and that something we didn't pick up. So they're all good reasons why, very easy threads for the agencies to pull when they're in looking at that. I don't know, Laurie, do you have anything?
No, I actually would back that 100%. I think the other thing we don't look at is when investigations occurred or major deviations, I typically will say to people, either you just now identified a risk that's been realized that you didn't know was possible, or something broke in your control strategy. So you need to go back and loop back on that as well and look at those. But I agree. I think once a year with APQR is a very good suggestion, Nuala, too. It's a minimum, right? That now I've gone a whole year. What are some things I may need to update? But I love the event-based sort of triggers as well, too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it makes it easier for people to connect that to having to update or do a review and possibly update. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to just add to, Nuala, I thought you'd appreciate this, is whenever I was with a client, when I was consulting, or even today, my response always is HPRA, don't play from a QRM perspective. They know exactly what they're looking for when they come in. So I'm always thinking HPRA standard when I'm building a quality risk management program.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to you talk, it sounds like HPRA is looking for something more formalized than maybe the FDA is looking for. So, and that's good to note because so many of our companies are global companies and are doing business everywhere. And it's nice to have an understanding of the differences from one regulator to the next. Nuala, did you have anything else to add to that?
I think we've covered that. There's lots more to come. We hope
absolutely.
to get people to come back for the next update
Teasers.
on those.
Yeah.
Right. No, and that's exactly what we're hoping to do here. So you both made mention earlier to risk culture, and I know we're going to do a deep dive on that in another episode, but where are we as an industry in terms of strong risk culture, and what work is yet to be done here, Nuala? Just give us an overview, because we are going to deep dive into this, like I mentioned.
Yeah, now
I want to really establish the importance for our listeners of this particular topic.
Yeah, we're going to do a whole show around risk culture, and I have no doubt that this is going to come up peppered throughout all of our other episodes as well. But for me, one of the real things here around risk culture, and it's the shift in mindset that we would like to see in the industry. When you say what work yet has to be done, we have done a lot of good work. But for me, the next step up is not kind of an evolutionary step. We need a little bit of a revolutionary step. And that really is around not considering quality risk management as a compliance requirement or even a requirement within the quality management system. Effective risk management is a business capability. And if we could get our leaders to recognize that being able to effectively manage their risk is actually a business requirement, not just a compliance requirement, it will influence the perception of risk and how it's managed, the weaving in of it into everyday decision making, ensuring that we don't just have this situation where we have like a specialized function over here with folks who have QRM in their title, and they're the folks who are saving the day or saving us from the unknown, but that everybody, I mean, for me, the day that we see that risk management and the fundamentals, I mean the fundamentals of risk management and risk science and critical thinking are being embedded as part of the fundamental GMP training that everybody in the organization has. So everybody's eyes and ears are looking for those chinks in the armor, and it's not just down to the routine risk assessment that we do.
Sure.
Or the specialists. So that's the key change, and I think that's what we'll be talking about. We'll also hopefully get some panel members in, and we're looking forward to that on further discussions.
Thank you. Yeah, that's going to be a great episode. The FDA's guidance encourages industry adoption of new technological advances. We haven't really talked about technology too much in this particular episode, and then of course integrated quality systems. Lori, I'm going to start with you, but Nuala, I want to get your thoughts on this too. Can you highlight some of the new challenges or technologies or emerging topics in risk management, just to plant some seeds for our listeners about things to think about for upcoming episodes?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I just did a talk recently on the future of the quality professional, even with all the new technologies that are coming.
Right.
I think our biggest challenge will be, do we have data and subject matter experts to assess some of these new technologies that are coming? Let's just make something up, robotics or something. Am I going to understand how to assess from a risk-based validation perspective? So I think that's the first challenge I can think of, that some of the things we're adopting in the industry are not, they're unique to our industry, but they're from other industries sometimes, and we're bringing them in. So I think that's one challenge, is do we have sort of the information we need? But some of the other guidances that have actually only been out for a few years, that I think, again, remember ICHQ 9 is 2005, and some companies are still struggling, right? Imagine something that was approved maybe in 2016. So that there's some newer things, and one that comes to mind is like an ICH E6 Rev 2. That's all around GCPs, which is good clinical practices. And that's one that I've been trying to tackle in the industry back when I was consulting, and even now in my current role, is how do we integrate risk management principles into our clinical studies, which in and of itself is inherently risk, right? You're sort of studying something new on patients. How do we formalize that a little bit? And how do we bring it into the conversations with these study management teams when they're working on these studies? It's something I think they talk about. They're just not used to formalizing it and prioritizing it and thinking about mitigations or continuity plans. These are terms that may be a little bit newer, and that formality piece. Another one that Nuala and I talked about, there's been a lot of FDA guidance that's come out recently about nitrosamines, which speaks back to kind of the elemental impurities piece too, and understanding what's in our final product, right? What risk may that introduce to the patient? And that goes along with excipients as well, which there was guidance that came out from the European Union on that one. In terms, it's very, very, very structured. It actually almost tells you how to do it, which is kind of nice from a guidance perspective from a regulator. Those are ones I'm still seeing some companies kind of battle with. How do I get this into my system? My thought processes around excipients, impurities, things like that is just bring it right into your materials management process, your receipt of materials, and then how you're documenting those final pieces around your product.
Thank you.
Those are just a couple. There's lots out there. I'm sure Nuala has some suggestions too.
Nuala's
probably seeing other things as well. So
yeah, and I think one of the biggest challenges facing the industry, particularly, I mean, from a whole host of different fronts, is our approach to cell and gene therapies. I mean, this is a whole new ballgame for us, and certainly when we start to look at risk management around these cell and gene therapies and personalized medicine, you're talking about arm-to-arm technologies. You're talking about really short shelf life. You're talking about cold chain, and your supply and logistics chain. So, I mean, the concept of product mix-up or things like that, transportation studies, I mean, that just brings a whole new ballgame in terms of how we manage our risk there. And more importantly, because of the short shelf life of these products, it's going to require a decision velocity that maybe we don't have that, imperative when we're looking at some of the longer shelf life products in the release decision. If we do have an issue, we have time to process that and assess the risks. So there's a whole new, approach for adequate and effective risk management when we come to those cell and gene therapies. Not to mention just even the fundamentals of aseptic techniques and moving those up the spectrum for not just the cell and gene. We still see a lot of product recalls associated with aseptic manufacture. So, we still have challenges there. And as I mentioned earlier, one within the EU, the Annex 1 is trying to address that and assisting with guidance around that.
Right. Yes. And they had their update just at the beginning of this year and really focused in on some issues with aseptic processing. So definitely we continue to see that as being an issue in the industry. And it sounds like as we become more sophisticated in our technologies and in our products, then there obviously are inherent risks there that need to be considered. We've covered broadly much of the QRM field, but as we mentioned, we're going to really start to pick apart certain topics one episode at a time. So in closing today, or before we close, I want to just give both of you an opportunity to provide our listeners with some highlights of really what to expect in upcoming episodes of QRM, of the QRM series, and really what kinds of feedback you're looking for from them to help you select topics and speakers and other important factors for subsequent episodes. Lori, you want to start us off with that?
Yeah, first and foremost, I'd love to hear what the listeners want to hear about. I think that would help Nuala and I. We have our ideas, but we do this every day, right? So we'd love to hear what people want to know more about. But my near and dear to my heart is the risk culture piece. I'm really looking forward to that episode and how we can design that and things we can discuss about that. I think that's just so critical to making the holistic risk management picture work. I think, Nuala, you're going to have to fill me into it because we had quite a list, but the regulator panel, I think that's going to be really fun. We discussed even reaching outside of industry.
Right.
Everybody's doing risk management, right? You don't get on a plane without a risk assessment even having been performed. That's how the maintenance is even done. Reaching out and seeing what else is out there. How can we bring some of those thoughts into our industry? Decision making, the principles around that, and using risk. What I like to refer to in terms of like the risk culture that I'd like to bring into that conversation is changing language around risk. Risk is scary to people, and calling it risk curious. What do I need to know about this risk? How can I manage this risk? What's risk is even out there? I think that changes my mindset.
Yeah, I think so. Makes it less risky.
Yeah, less scary. And Nuala, I know there's others too that we've discussed as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a series of, at the moment, we've got 8 different frameworks. But as Lori said, we are open to a suggestion. We're very agile and we like to be flexible and. And customer focused. So, but some of the things that we will talk about are also the extension. All risks impact our patient, and for me, I struggle with the fact that we've created this discipline called quality risk management, when we know that it's not just the quality of the product that can affect our patient; it can be the availability of that product, and we've seen so much over drug shortages in recent years.
Well, we've seen a lot of supply chain issues through this pandemic, right? So, very important point.
Pandemic and crisis planning. So, I mean, I really see the integration of quality risk management with, business continuity planning, with crisis management, with supply chain risk management. And I don't distinguish between the skills that we would need. And yet we very often find in organizations, mostly in organizations, that these are being managed by different groups and that there isn't a continuity of approaches and thinking in terms of. So I almost want to take the Q out of QRM in order to ensure that we're really looking holistically across our supply chains to reduce the risk to the patient, because they all impact the patient. So we'll have lots to talk about on some of those shows.
I second that, Nuala. I second that. Take the Q out of it. Yeah, it's risk management.
It's risk management, right?
Because it's more about being patient focused rather than just being worrying about something that may have a product quality impact. For sure. The other things we'll be talking about is also competency development within the industry and skilling up. And we're going to hopefully throw it out there to the industry and some panel of experts to talk about the case for us having a chief risk officer that is within our pharma industry. Now, they may, they certainly exist in the insurance industries and in the banking sectors and other sectors. And we may even have a chief risk officer that's more looking at the financial risk within our corporate office. But I would really love to see having a professional, qualification or certification of a chief risk officer who's looking across the supply chain per product and really trying to reduce down the risks. It would also help us when it comes to ensuring that we have the patient in the boardroom when we make some of these decisions around outsourcing or around, buying cheaper components from a second source. And some of these decisions that get taken when they look like they make sense on paper, but nobody's really looking at the impact in the longer term and the risk to the patient. On top of that, both Lori and I are super duper podcast fans. Love the medium. So we're hoping to bring some structure to our discussions as well around having, top tips and takeaways and a regular slot on useful resources and risks in the news, hot topics. What have we seen this week or this month that might be relevant and interesting for us to cover as well? So it's not just talking heads. Hopefully we'll be sharing some resources as well.
Yeah, no, it sounds like really useful topics and timely, discussion. So I'm really looking forward to this new QRM focused monthly podcast. So I want to thank you both for being here and helping to kick this off on Voices in Validation this week. It's been great having you, and we'll look forward to another episode next month.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to give a big thank you to our producer, Ben Kitchen, and the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. And as always, a big thank you to you, our valued listeners. If you have topic requests or guest suggestions for our new QRM series or for any other episodes, we'd love to hear from you on that. And if you enjoyed this episode, we ask you to subscribe in your podcast player of choice so you never miss us. And don't forget to share it with your friends, colleagues, and online networks. We really do appreciate your help in getting the word out there. For today's show notes and information on this podcast, please visit www.ivtnetwork.com. We'll be back again next week with another great interview. Until then, stay healthy and safe.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.
IVT's Validation Week is going virtual for 2020 this October. Not to be confused with a single presentation, webinar, or Zoom training, Val Week 2020 brings a completely virtual 3-day conference experience. With nearly 30 expert speakers and a combination of live and on-demand sessions crafted with your time in mind, the caliber of training content is unrivaled. Hear from top pharma, biotech, and medical device subject matter experts, gain exclusive insights from FDA speakers, build up your team's validation toolkit with take-home checklists and materials, and leverage unlimited networking opportunities with colleagues and key decision makers. Plus, claim up to 15 credit hours toward GMP training requirements. You won't want to miss it. Visit www.informaconnect.com/validation week for all details on agenda and registration. Once again, that's www.informaconnect.com/validation-week for all event details.